Hello and welcome to another standard video here on the official MTG Arena channel. Today we're checking out this monowhite station survival aggro deck, mostly built around the Lumen-Class Frigate. This new 2-mana Spacecraft from Edge of Eternities has the station mechanic, so we can tap another creature we control in order to add charge counters to our Spacecraft equal to that creature's power. And then at 2 or more charge counters, the Frigate gives our other creatures +1/+1. That one's not too difficult to enable, since we even have some 2-power to 1-drops in the deck, so we can play those turn 1, turn 2 play Frigate, tap our creature, and then immediately give the team +1/+1 going forward. And then by giving the team +1/+1, it also becomes much easier to get to 12 or more charge counters, and then now the Frigate turns into a 3/5 creature with flying and lifelink, so that can also start applying pressure. The Frigate's also not bad in multiples, since giving the team additional +1/+1 bonuses also makes it easier to get to that 12 or more charge counter threshold. And then the Frigate also plays very well with the survival creatures from Duskmourn, such as the Veteran Survivor, a 1-mana 2/1, so perfect for stationing your Frigate. And then at the beginning of our second main phase, if this creature is tapped, which is very convenient by simply stationing, we get to now exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. So that gives our deck some main deck graveyard hate, which is always a welcome addition, since there are some graveyard combo decks running around. And then as long as we have 3 or more cards exiled with the Survivor, it also picks up an extra +3/+3 and hexproof, so that's a nice little bonus, even if it's not going to happen all that often. And then at 2 mana, we've got another Survivor, the Reluctant Role Model. If it's tapped at the beginning of our second main phase, gets our choice of a flying counter, a lifelink counter, or a +1/+1 counter. And whenever this creature or another creature we control dies, if it had counters on it, we can put those counters on up to 1 target creature, so that can also occasionally come in handy, since besides the Role Models counters, we've got a few more throughout, such as the ones from Sunstar Chaplain, another new addition from Edge of Eternities, a 2-mana 3/2, saying at the beginning of our end step, if we control 2 or more tapped creatures, we can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature we control. So getting a +1 counter every turn is pretty useful. And then for 2 mana, we can also remove a +1/+1 counter from a creature we control in order to tap target artifact or creature down. So if we can consistently get a counter each turn, then now we have 2 mana to deal with opposing threats as well, since our deck doesn't have a ton of built-in removal, but having it built into our creatures is perfect, since we need creatures for the deck to function. So all these are payoffs for basically tapping our creatures down. We can do so with either the Frigate or perhaps with a Warden of the Inner Sky, which also ties everything together quite nicely. We can tap 3 untapped artifacts and or creatures we control in order to put a +1/+1 counter on it. We also get to scry 1, giving us a bit of card selection, and as long as the Warden has 3 or more counters, they don't necessarily need to be +1 counters, so it can also function with flying counters or lifelink counters from our role model. Then now the Warden also gains flying and vigilance, and having a large vigilant creature is perfect, since we can attack with it, and then in our second main phase still maybe tap it down to help station the Frigate, so we get even more creatures online. And then rounding out the deck, there's the Lightstall Inquisitor, another 2-powered 1-drop. This one also has Vigilance, and when it enters also disrupts the opponent's hand. They get to choose a card from their hand and exile it. If it's a land, it now enters tapped. If it's a non-land, it will cost them 1 more mana to deploy. And then a Seam Rip gives us some very efficient removal as essentially a portable hole in enchantment form, which can exile a non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value 2 or less. Upside of being an enchantment is that it doesn't get exiled by an opposing Star Cage, although Star Cage is pretty brutal against our deck regardless. I would prefer a portable hole in this deck, since artifacts can also be tapped with a Warden, but portable hole is no longer in standard, so Seam Rip will have to do. And then at 2 mana, we also have the Voice of Victory, which also plays reasonably well in this deck, since it helps us go wide. If it attacks, we end up with 2 tapped warrior tokens end of turn if our opponent doesn't take them out, so that can also help enable the Sunstar Chaplain's ability, for instance. And if we're pumping the team up a whole bunch with a Frigate, then going wide with tokens also outputs even more damage, as those warriors might be 2/2s or 3/3s, so the damage can also add up very quickly, and also makes it awkward for the opponent to play their instants, as they can only cast spells during their turn. And then topping off our curve, full set of Sanguine Evangelist, which also helps us go wide by making a Flying Bat token when it enters or dies, and it also has Battle Cry, so can boost up all our attacking creatures if it attacks. And then we also have 2 copies of the Wandering Rescuer with Convoke, because the Convoke mechanic is yet another way of tapping down our creatures. We want to be curving out with lots of cheap threats, so then we can be convoking the Rescuer pretty early on in the game already as a 3/4 with double strike, and then other tapped creatures we control have hexproof, so that's another layer of protection. You can also flash in the Rescuer, but often we'll be main facing it, so we get the most out of our various survival abilities, so we can still trigger those as they won't be triggering in the opponent's turn. And then the mana base is very budget friendly with 20 planes, couple fountain ports to maybe spice things up in those longer grindy games, can maybe make some tokens or sacrifice tokens to draw, so that can also come in handy. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the draw with a promising hand. Even though Warden does not fully station the frigates on turn 2, opponent on a black sacrifice deck. So I want to keep Seam Rip for some of the more impactful 2-drops they might play. Gorehound can also be pretty scary as it can set up their graveyard. So our opponent's going to try to raise the past back a whole bunch of creatures. This turn, I've got a few options. It's not going to be Frigate just yet. Could make it the role model, so next turn if I do decide to play Frigate, we can easily tap it down, or we can play the Chaplain to activate Warden. So we've got a few options. Voice of Victory is a better target for Seam Rip. Although a Zealot is even scarier. Surprised they let it go to the graveyard, so maybe they have one in hand already, or they're about to play Sephiroth. Yeah, now I'm hesitant to play the Seam Rip, although voice attacks, it gets to trigger the Gorehound a whole bunch, so that might still be okay. And then question is, do we play the Frigate here? Can station using the role model, pump the team, this triggers. Or I can just play Chaplain and then activate Warden to tap all 3 down and we get a bunch of counters. Voice is also an option, so next turn if I play the Frigate, the tokens get pumped. But I think I'm gonna have to win this game with flyers. So then starting to grow the Warden makes sense. And then I don't need another Chaplain, a 4th land could be useful. And then I can give this one flying already, which will make it easier to give it a lifelink going forward. And then, yeah, Warden getting a counter means it's closer to having flying and vigilance as well. Now a Link Breaker. Opponent keeps on top. So maybe they found a Raise the Past or a Sacrifice outlet. In the meantime, I can play the Frigate, play another Warden. I don't think we're convoking the Wandering Rescuer just yet. So I can station using the Chaplain, and then activate Warden using these 3. Bottom Voice, hit for 5. And then second main phase I may as well station some more. Now we can go for lifelink. And then I can put a counter on the lifelinker, or we can keep growing the Warden so that eventually flies as well. Let's go for the role model. Corrupted Conviction will sacrifice draw 2. The insect token lets them surveil. So the graveyard's not too scary at the moment. We get to untap. Alright, so plenty of options here, including playing the Rescuer. I can maybe even play Voice first. Convoke this out. Tapping these 3. Fully station the Frigates. And then go to attackers. Opponent falls to 8, we gain some life back, get a counter, and then no point in stationing further. But I can now put a counter on probably the Warden. But next turn an all-out attack is looking good. Opponent eventually found Sephiroth, but is it too little too late? Maybe if they find another sack outlet, they can transform Sephiroth already. No, we get to untap, and another frigate's a pretty good draw here. So I can play it. Station using Chaplain. And then an all-out attack looks fine to me. And yeah, the tokens are also 3/3, so those hit incredibly hard. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. Our hand's Creature Light. So we might struggle to station both frigates if the Chaplain dies. But I don't think it's bad enough to mulligan. Just need to draw a few more cheap creatures, plenty of those in the deck. Although our turn 1 is going to be wasted, as we can't seam rip when we're on the play. Opponent had the Llanowar Elves. So I could seam rip the Elves, prevent them from casting a Mossborn Hydra here, which would be tough to beat. But then we're also playing off-curve, which is not ideal. So I think I still have to play 2-drop, and then next turn we can double spell. And then, what makes the most sense, Voice worse at enabling the frigate, but if Voice can just attack, and we played alongside Chaplain, we'll also get a counter. So maybe that could still work. Opponent's got a Tifa and a fetch lane, so we can still seam rip to get rid of Tifa at least. Which is quite scary otherwise. Yeah, not gonna mess around with the Warden. And then Chaplain's pretty good alongside the Voice. So counter on probably the Voice itself. Next turn we can station the frigates using the Chaplain perhaps. And then Voice gets to attack for 3. The tokens turn into a pair of 2/2s. So the damage adds up quickly. Now a Traveling Chocobo. A good card in this deck, but it's not the main threat we're worried about. Even though it can enable Tifa and the Hydra. So they did not see a land on top, forced to run out of fetch land, and the fewer fetch lands they have in hand, the better for us. Could even play 2 frigates, but then we wouldn't be able to station both if we want to attack with a Voice, which I think we do. So play frigate. Also can't forget about the Chaplain's second ability here, which might come up at some point. Still gonna go for Warden over another frigate. And then Voice attacks. And we can keep stationing. And then counter is not going to matter, because their opponent scoops it up. But yeah, next turn with another frigate, we are pretty likely to attack for lethal. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw with a keepable hand. Facing Starting Town, so could be anything. Mako, so likely the VV Cauldron combo deck. So then having Survivor as a way to exile cards from their graveyard could be relevant. Although for now I think I still Inquisitor first. And then if I play Role Model or Frigate on 2, on turn 3, we can ensure a tapped Survivor. So the opponent's Sanctuary will now enter tapped. Opponent did have a torch, so I'm glad we didn't get the Survivor exiled right away. And I can play the Role Model, or I can wait so it can immediately pick up a counter so another torch doesn't exile it, and just play the Frigate for now. Upside of Role Model is that it's maybe easier to convoke a Rescuer, but let's go for the Frigate. Although then again, artifacts may not be safe if our opponent's running a Braid. It's going to be an Eidetic Memory for now. Okay, so we get to play both Role Model and Survivor. Station with both. Exile your torch. And Role Model can pick up a +1 counter for starters, I think. There's Vivi. Do not have an answer to that one. Evangelist isn't bad. So what are our options? Probably start by playing Evangelist. Then I could still convoke out the Rescuer even at instant speed. Although then we miss out on our survival triggers, mostly the Role Model matters. Could also just main phase everything. So, a couple options here. Yeah, I think playing Evangelist makes sense. If I were to station, then I'm not convoking. So maybe I just go all out here. And then next turn, the Frigate can also fly over. This can also gain flying. Opponent with Tersa, good combo with the Eidetic Memory. And that memory can put counters on Vivi, which in turn can make a bunch of mana. So yeah, the Role Model is gonna need lifelink to keep up. Can exile another Tersa with a Survivor. Right, opponent bouncing the Rescuer, so now they could maybe still bounce one of my other creatures. Yep, the Role Model. Alright, so now opponent's gonna play defense. Inquisitor can exile their last card, so that seems like a fine starting point. So what did they have left? The Stormchaser's Talent will now cost 2. Alright, so replay Role Model. And then, yeah, don't have any great attacks on the ground, but I can convoke the Rescuer. I guess we keep Evangelist on defense. Maybe that makes sense, because I'll get a bad token if it dies. Fully station. And go to attackers. And get in for 5 in the air. Exile your... Maybe Into the Floodmaw is more relevant. Although I guess Tersa can give them a +1 counter if they find Soul Cauldron. But want to get rid of their spells for the Stormchaser's Talent as well. And then, pretty important decision here. Do we want flying? Yeah, with our opponent at 10, that probably makes sense. Okay, so I've got an Evangelist, which is happy to chump. A bunch of hexproof creatures. Now our opponent does have the mana to play Talent, level up, and still play Into the Floodmaw. So I have to be careful that we don't just die, because Vivi can make a lot of mana. So our opponent discarded another VV, which we can also maybe exile with a Survivor next turn. And they found a Cauldron. So Cauldron exiles VV before we get a chance. And then now all their creatures with counters on them can also make mana. And with double talents, they can get back all sorts of spells as well. So yeah, we might just beat that here. Play talents, level up, get back Floodmaw, bounce Evangelist, and then they should have enough. But they can cast a few more spells beforehand. So yeah, if Survivor managed to maybe exile the second Floodmaw as well, and we could have survived. So they still haven't activated the Mako's ability. And bouncing Evangelist does not leave behind a bat. They can still cast another talent here and keep going. But yeah, we pretty much died a while ago. Memory has even more counters. It's a bit of damage to spare. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw. Hand seems keepable. Inquisitor turn to either Role Model or Frigate. Up against a red, could be red aggro, in which case our hand's got some decent tools with a Role Model, eventually gaining a lifelink, and pumping our team to hopefully have larger creatures than the opponent is not a bad place to be. Opponent exiled a Lightning Helix, so this borrows burn. And Inquisitor is happy to trade for Challenger, even though we can pump it up with the frigates. So if I play Role Model, our opponent could take it out, but even with an extra counter, it's still within range of a Lightning Helix. So could also just play the frigates. Then I'm not immediately impacting the board, but the Role Model's also not triggering right away. So this is a bit of an awkward turn. Could also play Survivor because of Fountain Port, limiting my white mana. So the fact that it's a 1-drop may not matter all that much, but it's maybe still easier to deploy in future turns. No, maybe I should play Frigate, because between the +1/+1 from Frigate and the +1 counter, maybe if our opponent's tapped out, I can get it up to a 4/4 right away. So that seems a worthwhile endeavor. Screaming Nemesis is tough, can maybe prevent us from gaining life, puts a lot of pressure on us as well. And we're not drawing the lanes we need. So now they can burn their own Nemesis to prevent me from gaining a life, especially if they have a cheaper burn spell. Yeah, drawing up planes here would unlock a couple more interesting plays, so we can get our hand in play as soon as possible. Alright, opponent decides to hang back with a Nemesis. Drew the planes, so I got my wish. So in that case, I can still keep stationing the frigate. Do I go Survivor plus Frigate, or do I just play an Evangelist? I think we double spell. So then Frigate into Survivor. Maybe could have sequenced a little differently to play around a 2 damage burn spell by first stationing the second Frigate with a Role Model, but our opponent lets it go. Not really interested in attacking. But now we can maybe go for flying or lifelink. I guess I'll go for lifelink, but there's a little chance of that mattering. Lightning Helix goes face. Could still see a Witchstalker Frenzy, take it out with 5 damage, or maybe a pair of burn spells. We get to untap, alright. So, maybe still not the turn to attack with a role model, since I'm sure our opponent can interfere. Also don't want to deal 5 to the Nemesis, especially if they shut down our life gain ability. But yeah, we still have some other decent plays available. Not hating Warden plus another Frigate, because Warden can also tap down the artifacts to grow, so we also make use of them. Or we can try to fully station a Frigate to attack with lifelink in the air, which is also reasonable. And then maybe play the Evangelist out. Sure. So let's say we tap the Survivor here. Tap the role model. And then I can fully station the second Frigate as well. And wow, our opponent explodes, so they must not have had an easy way to target their own Nemesis to shut down our life gain. And yeah, once we're attacking with, how much power is this going to be? 8 power, lifelink in the air. Next turn the role model flies as well and can fly over. So we can pretty easily fly over the Nemesis and just attack in the air for the win. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw. Our hand is reasonable. Probably looking at Survivor, Role Model, Warden on 3, can maybe tap creatures down to enable the survival abilities. Opponent on the monowhite life gain deck. Alright, it's going to be a tough matchup. We do have a Seam Rip, which is useful, but our opponent starting with Leyline means any lifelinkers extra threatening. Could keep Seam Rip to answer their 2-drops, like the Channeler or the Ajani's Pridemate. But with Leyline, maybe the lifelinkers are the actual threats. Yeah, eventually Evangelist can make a token to block, but our opponent's going to be gaining 2 life next turn. So I'm just going to Seam Rip. We're not going to outrace our opponents, but maybe we can outmuscle them. Inquisitor is an interesting choice. I probably still want to play the role model next turn. Survivor costing 2 may not be super relevant, or I can just pick one Evangelist since we have a pair of them. Although, given that we have Fountain Port in hand, my 1-drops are less likely to be played on the same turn, so picking one of the 1-drops also made sense. Now Authority makes my creatures enter tapped. That's potentially an advantage here, as Role Model will immediately pick up an extra counter. And we'll make it a +1 counter probably. Does make my Warden a bit less effective. Opponent also with a Sheltered by Ghosts now. Alright, don't have another Seam Rip to answer that at the moment. Probably just go for Evangelists, since we can triple 1-drop. And yeah, the Inquisitor is now a 5/3 thanks to the Leyline. Frigate's an interesting draw. It's going to be a little bit harder to station now with the Authority. So what's my plan? I mean, it's still Frigate. And then play a creature out. Probably a Survivor. And then I could station the Frigates with Evangelist to give the team +1/+1, or I can stay back to block and then double block Inquisitor to discourage an attack. Opponent's got a Hawk. 3/3, pretty large. And just a Sanctifier attacking. Could play another Evangelist now. And then station Frigate using the first Survivor. And then stay back. Could also maybe station with the bat, because it's really just Evangelist that's holding off the Inquisitor. Although if our opponent's got another Sheltered by Ghosts, we just die, but we're probably in trouble if they have another one anyways. So we're scheduled to take 6. And Linden gives him more life, but that's at least not resulting in any additional damage right now. Alright. Can we stabilize now? It's not going to be easy. I can play a couple more creatures. Could also activate Fountain Ports, either making a fish or a treasure. Although the fish costs a life as well. I probably need another Survivor, as it has a bit more power than Warden. Not going to be tapping my creatures anytime soon. And then I can still make a tapped fish. And then, yeah, the bats cannot attack. We're still somewhat far from fully stationing the frigate. They probably have to just pass. Now the Pride Maid is scary, since that's going to grow incredibly quickly. They might have a second Linden in hand, which is why they're okay making the trade. Also should have probably made a fish with Fountain Port first. Because the Pride Maid is just going to keep getting bigger now thanks to the Authority. But we probably need to find another Seam Rip to answer it anyway. So we managed to trade for some creatures. And now Chaplain could tap down a creature, assuming we have enough counters. Yeah, let's say we play Chaplain, play Warden. I'll still have 2 mana left to activate. And with Warden I can also get a counter, but it doesn't leave a ton of blockers back. But yeah, that's gotta still be the play. So if I activate Warden, I can also tap the frigates for that purpose. And then a couple of bats. That leaves Survivor to trade for Inquisitor, can double block Sanctifier. Get rid of the planes. And then I might also be able to station the frigate some more with one of the Survivors. No attacks. Exile Linden. And then Chaplain, counter on Warden. 2 mana to tap the Pride Mates. Opponent had another Linden as we suspected. But they don't have any great attacks. Opponent reconsiders, and we get our turn back. Alright, so we're slowly starting to stabilize, thanks to the Chaplain. This turn, I want to keep tapping the Survivor to exile more stuff. And then we want Warden to pick up more counters as well. It's a long way to get the opponent to 0. Let's see here. Station here. Station using a bat. And then Yeah, we're not quite at a point where this has flying and vigilance. So probably just attack with my flyers. Although now Linden's an extra threat we need to keep into account. I can always Fountain Port, make an extra token. So maybe it's just a frigate attacking. And gain 3 life back. And then Warden could activate, tapping Chaplain. And 2 bats. Then I would still have a reasonable block on Sanctifier. Can trade Survivor for Inquisitor. But then I don't really want to have to tap down Linden. Alright, our opponent concedes. This is not going to be an easy game to win. But I think we do have the tools here to eventually get there. It's just going to take a lot of patience, a lot of discipline and tapping the opponent's stuff down. And we're generating an advantage each turn, even if it's not much. But every turn getting extra counters, eventually flying the Warden, maybe activating Fountain Port a few more times, can always make treasures and then sack them to draw. So we're getting ahead, whereas the opponent's just top decking, which, you know, depending on the top decks, could still go their way. But yeah, I had faith that we could eventually turn it around here, which is still pretty impressive. Alright, so we got to see this mono-white station survival aggro deck in action, and yeah, I'm quite pleased with the synergies between the survival creatures from Duskmourn with the station spacecraft from Edge of Eternities, so those are definitely a match made in heaven. And then the deck can still play a somewhat long game despite the curve being so low, thanks to all our activated abilities, being able to tap our creatures down. We've got a few mana sinks here and there as well, so overall quite impressed by the deck, even though it will have some weaknesses, mainly the Star Cage can exile most of our board, so that's not a card we want to face. And of course there's plenty of combo decks like VV Cauldron that can just go off out of nowhere, and we don't have any instant speed interaction to really mess them up, so that also seems like a more difficult matchup. But still a reasonable deck for the best of one ladder, as it's a proactive strategy that can get games over pretty quickly, so it's not a bad best of one strategy. So yeah, that's going to do it for today's gameplay. I want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.